The air in the kitchen hung heavy thick with the bitter scent of scorched coffee, and something sharper, something like betrayal, though I couldn't name it yet. The dim light from a single bulb flickered above, casting jagged shadows across the tiled floor, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for the fracture to come. I sat at the table, my hands folded steady, despite the tremor I felt creeping beneath my skin. Across from me, my daughter Lila stood with her arms crossed, her eyes glinting like polished obsidian, cold and unreadable. She wasn't the girl I'd raised, the one who'd once clung to my hand under starlit skies. No, this was someone else, someone who'd learned to wield contempt like a blade. "Give Evan your credit card," she said, her voice flat rehearsed, slicing through the silence. "Or you're out of this house by dawn. We're not your charity, Dad." The words landed like a blow, but it was the mug in her hand that struck harder. She tilted it, deliberate, slow, as if savoring the moment. Scalding coffee poured over the edge, a dark cascade that hit my lap with a hiss. The heat seared through my trousers, biting into my skin like 1,000 tiny teeth. The mug followed, slipping from her fingers. Or was it intentional, and shattered on the floor, porcelain fragments scattering like the bones of something once whole? I didn't flinch. Not yet. The pain was sharp, but it was the look in her eyes that burned deeper, a look that said, I was no longer her father, but an obstacle to be removed. Evan, my 16-year-old grandson, slouched at the far end of the table, his face bathed in the blue glow of his phone. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge the chaos unfolding. His fingers tapped lazily, as if the world beyond his screen held no weight. He'd demanded $6,000 for a gaming setup, not as a request but as a right, his voice dripping with the entitlement of youth. Lila, my daughter, had backed him like a general marshalling her troops, her words a calculated strike against me. "You're sitting on money you don't even use," she'd said earlier, her tone laced with disdain. "What's the point if you won't help family?" The word twisted in my chest, a rusted key in a lock long forgotten. I stared at the dark stain spreading across my trousers, steam curling upward like a ghost escaping its grave. The shards at my feet glinted in the flickering light, each one catching a piece of the fractured moment. I didn't move, didn't speak. Not because I was broken, but because I was listening to the silence that followed, to the pulse of something awakening inside me. It wasn't surrender. It was something older, something I'd buried long ago in the ashes of my past. 30 years as a firefighter had taught me to face fire without blinking, to walk into flames when others fled. I'd seen homes reduced to cinders, lives turned to smoke. But this small deliberate act of cruelty from my own blood burned in a way no blaze ever had. Lila turned her back, walking to the sink as if she'd spilled nothing more than dishwater. Her hands moved under the faucet, mechanical, unrepentant. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she said, without looking at me. "Evan needs this. You owe us." "Oh." The word hung in the air, heavy with accusation. I dabbed at my lap with a napkin, the burn throbbing, but secondary to the ache in my chest. I'd given her everything, years of double shifts, sleepless nights, patching together her school projects, a home bought with sweat and sacrifice after her mother Mara was taken from us. I'd raised her alone, a widower navigating a teenage girl's grief while my own heart bled in silence. And now she stood there rewriting our history with a single word: "Oh." I looked at Evan, still lost in his phone, his indifference a mirror of Lila's contempt. But there was something else in the room, something I couldn't yet name, a whisper, a shadow flickering at the edge of my vision. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sense that this moment had been orchestrated, planned in shadows I hadn't seen until now. The air felt charged, as if the house itself was complicit, its walls holding secrets I'd been too blind to notice. "I'm not giving him the card," I said, my voice low, steady, each word scraping against the raw edges of my throat. The silence that followed was different now, heavier, like the moment before a storm breaks. Lila turned, her face arranged in a smirk I didn't recognize, a stranger's mask on the daughter I'd loved. "You're lucky we even let you stay here after your surgery," she said, leaning on the counter like a judge delivering a verdict. "You couldn't walk without me. I managed your bills, your prescriptions, your life. And now you want to lecture me about money." Her words were sharp, rehearsed, each one a calculated jab meant to wound. I let them land, let them sink into me like embers into dry wood. But I didn't rise. I didn't argue. My silence seemed to unsettle her, her smirk faltering for a fraction of a second. "You hand over the card," she said, her voice rising, "or you're out by sunrise. That's final." The burn on my legs pulsed, a reminder of the fire I'd survived both tonight and in the decades before. I stood slowly, deliberately, my back straightening despite the ache in my hip. I met her eyes, and in that moment I saw something flicker, uncertainty, perhaps, or the ghost of the girl she used to be. "I'll be gone before the stars fade," I said, my voice calm but edged with iron. Her smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of surprise. She'd expected me to beg, to crumble. She'd mistaken my stillness for weakness. I turned my steps, measured each one, carrying the weight of a life I'd thought was mine. The hallway stretched before me, lined with photographs that watched me pass Lila at 6, clutching a stuffed rabbit. Mara, her smile frozen in sunlight we'd believed would last forever, Lila at her college graduation. My arm around her, my face etched with pride. Each image felt like a lie, now a relic from a time when trust was unbroken. But as I walked, the shadow at the edge of my vision grew sharper, more defined. It wasn't just memory. It was something else, something alive, whispering in the cracks of the house, urging me to look closer. In the guest room, the air was stale, tinged with antiseptic, and the faint musk of forgotten things. My suitcase sat in the closet, dusty but waiting, as if it had known this day would come. I pulled it down, the weight heavier than I remembered, my hip protesting with a dull ache. Pain was an old friend, one I'd learned to live with. I opened the nightstand drawer and found it a small envelope tucked away months ago, containing my birth certificate, insurance cards, and a slip of paper with my bank's routing number scrawled in my trembling hand. I hadn't known why I'd hidden it then. Now I did. The house was quiet, save for the distant hum of the television in the living room. Lila's laughter spilling through the walls like a mockery of joy. Not once did she knock on my door. Not once did Evan ask if I was all right. Their silence was a message clear as the coffee stain on my trousers. But as I folded my shirts into the suitcase, methodical, deliberate, I felt it again, that whisper, that shadow. It wasn't just the house. It was inside me, a spark, long buried now, stirring to life. I paused, my hand brushing against a small leather pouch at the back of the drawer. Inside was Mara's pearl ring, its surface smooth as a memory. I held it, feeling the weight of her absence, her voice echoing in my mind. "Don't let them take you, Richard. Not your heart, not your fire." A tear threatened, but I pushed it back. Tears were for later. Now I needed resolve. The front door creaked faintly, a delivery man's voice cutting through the night. Lila's sharp tone greeted him, packages arriving, life moving on as if I'd already vanished. I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound final like a lock clicking into place. The graduation photo on the dresser caught my eye, Lila and I shoulder to shoulder, her smile bright with ambition, mine heavy with sacrifice. I wasn't proud now, I was awake. Under the bed, something glinted, a notebook, old and worn, where I'd once jotted grocery lists. I pulled it out, dusted it off, and flipped to the last page. There in my handwriting were numbers. Account numbers. Mine. I stared at them, my pulse steadying. Lila thought she'd taken everything, but she hadn't seen this. She hadn't seen me. The sun was sinking, casting long shadows across the floor, but the darkness felt different now. Not suffocating, but alive, pregnant with possibility. I placed the suitcase by the door, my jacket draped over the handle. By the time the stars burned bright, I'd be gone. Not broken, not discarded, just gone, carrying a promise that wasn't written in ink, but in fire. And somewhere in the shadows of this house, Lila and Evan would learn that contempt has a price paid not in dollars but in truths they couldn't outrun. As I sat on the edge of the bed, the notebook in my hand, I felt it again, that whisper, that spark. It wasn't just mine. It was older, deeper, a force that had waited patiently in the dark, ready to rise when I was. The night stretched wide before me, and for the first time in years I wasn't afraid of what it held. The suitcase sat by the door, a silent sentinel, as I sank onto the edge of the guest room bed. The house was quiet now, the echoes of Lila's laughter from the living room fading into a stillness that felt alive, watchful. The burn on my legs throbbed, a dull reminder of the coffee's sting, but it was nothing compared to the ache in my chest, a wound that had no name, only memories. I closed my eyes and the past came rushing back, not as a comfort, but as a riddle, each fragment sharp and heavy, demanding to be pieced together. I saw Lila at 6, her small hand clutching a stuffed rabbit, its fur worn thin from her constant embrace. We were in the backyard under a sky so clear it seemed the stars might spill into our hands. "Daddy, do they ever fall?" she'd asked, her voice bright with wonder, pointing at the constellations. I'd laughed, hoisting her onto my shoulders, and told her stories of Orion and Cassiopeia, weaving tales of heroes and queens until she fell asleep against my neck. That night I'd carried her to bed, her warmth a promise that the world could still be kind. But the world wasn't kind. Not when Mara, my wife, was taken from us. Lila was 14 then, her eyes wide with a grief too big for her small frame. I was a firefighter 30 years in, accustomed to saving strangers from flames, but I couldn't save Mara from the cancer that consumed her. It was swift, merciless, leaving us both hollowed out. I'd stood by her hospital bed, holding her hand as she whispered, "Keep her safe, Richard. Don't let the fire take you both." Her pearl ring cool against my palm was all I had left when she slipped away. I raised Lila alone after that, trading double shifts for school fees, sleepless nights for parent-teacher meetings. I patched together her science projects, braided her hair when she couldn't, and stood in the rain at her soccer games cheering even when she missed the goal. When she graduated college, I was there, my chest tight with pride, as she crossed the stage, her smile brighter than the sun. I'd thought we'd made it, that we'd built something unbreakable. But now, staring at the guest room's peeling wallpaper, I wondered when the girl I'd raised had become a stranger. The memories weren't just nostalgia. They were clues, fragments of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. I opened my eyes, the notebook from the nightstand heavy in my hands. Its pages held more than grocery lists. They held fragments of my life, scribbled in moments of clarity I'd forgotten. A date here, a number there, a note about a bank statement I hadn't seen in months. The shadow I'd felt earlier, that whisper in the walls, seemed to pulse within the notebook, urging me to look closer. Had I always known deep down that Lila was slipping away? Or was something else at work? Something I couldn't yet name. I stood my hip, protesting as I crossed to the dresser. The graduation photo stared back at me, Lila, and I shoulder to shoulder, her smile, radiant mine, weathered but proud. But now I saw something I'd missed before, a faint smudge in the corner of the frame, like a shadow that didn't belong. I tilted the photo toward the light, and for a moment it seemed to shift, as if the shadow moved. My pulse quickened. Was it a trick of the light or something more? The house creaked, a low groan that felt like a warning, and I set the photo down, my fingers tingling. I thought of the years after Mara's death, when Lila was still my daughter, not this cold, calculating woman who'd poured coffee on me like I was nothing. She'd been bright, ambitious, her laughter a melody that filled our home. But there were moments even then that hinted at change, moments I'd ignored. The way she'd started locking her bedroom door, claiming privacy. The late-night phone calls she'd hush when I entered the room. The way her eyes would dart to the side when I asked about her friends, her plans. I'd chalked it up to growing up, to the natural drift of a young woman finding her way. But what if it was more? I remembered the day she brought Mark home, her husband-to-be, a man, with a smile, two smooth eyes that never quite met mine. He'd shaken my hand, his grip firm but cold, and talked of investments opportunities, a future for Lila that sounded like a sales pitch. I'd smiled, nodded, wanting her happiness above all else. But there was something in his voice, a cadence that didn't match his words, like a song played out of tune. Had he been the one to change her? Or had she been waiting for someone like him to unlock a part of her I'd never seen? The notebook trembled in my hands, though I hadn't moved. I flipped through it again, and there, tucked between two pages, was a folded piece of paper I didn't remember placing. It was yellowed edges, frayed, and written in Mara's handwriting. "Richard, the fire is in you. Don't let it die." My breath caught. I hadn't seen this note since her death, hadn't known it still existed. How had it found its way here in this house, in this moment? The shadow in the room seemed to thicken, the air growing heavy, as if Mara's presence lingered, watching, waiting. I tucked the note into my pocket, my fingers brushing against her pearl ring still in its leather pouch. The metal was warm now, impossibly, so as if it held a spark of her fire. I closed my eyes and for a moment I saw her Mara standing in a field of ash, her eyes fierce, her voice a whisper. They think they've taken you, but they haven't. Find the truth, Richard. The vision faded, leaving me breathless, my heart pounding with a certainty I hadn't felt in years. Lila's transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had started after my surgery, the one that left me leaning on a cane, my body betraying me as my spirit fought to keep up. Lila had stepped in, all smiles and concern, offering to manage my bills, my accounts, my life. You need to rest, Dad, she'd said, her voice honeyed, her eyes unreadable. I'd trusted her, grateful for her help, blind to the web she was weaving. She'd taken my bank cards, my passwords, my independence piece by piece, until I was a guest in her home, a shadow of the man who'd raised her. But there were signs even then that I'd ignored. The locked study door where she'd spend hours with Mark, their voices low, urgent. The packages that arrived, daily boxes of electronics, clothes, things I hadn't ordered. The way my mail stopped coming, redirected to an address I didn't know. I'd asked once casually, and Lila had laughed it off, saying she'd handle it. You don't need the stress, she'd said, her hand on my shoulder, her touch cold as winter. I'd believed her because she was my daughter. Because I wanted to believe. Now, standing in this borrowed room, I saw it all clearly. The coffee wasn't just an act of anger, it was a declaration, a line drawn in the sand. Lila didn't just want my money, she wanted my erasure. But why? What had turned her against me, against the man who'd given her everything? The shadow in the corner of the room pulsed again, and I swear I heard it, a whisper. Not Mara's voice, but something older, deeper, like the crackle of embers in a dying fire. It wasn't just memory guiding me now. It was something else, something that had waited for this moment to stir. I opened the suitcase, placing the notebook inside its weight, more than paper and ink. My fingers brushed against a small brass key tucked in a side pocket, its surface etched with a symbol I didn't recognize, a circle with a flame inside. I'd never seen it before, yet it felt familiar, like a memory I hadn't lived. My pulse quickened again, the air in the room growing heavy, electric. The key seemed to hum, a faint vibration that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. Where had it come from? And what did it unlock? The house creaked again, louder this time, as if it were waking up. I slipped the key into my pocket next to Mara's note and ring, a trinity of relics that felt like a map to something I couldn't yet see. The past wasn't just a story, it was a labyrinth, and I was only beginning to find the threads. Lila's betrayal wasn't just personal, it was a piece of a larger puzzle, one that hid in the shadows of this house, in the numbers I'd scribbled in the key I didn't know I owned. I looked at the graduation photo one last time, the shadow in the corner now unmistakable, a shape that seemed to watch me back. Lila's smile in the photo was a lie, but mine wasn't. I'd been proud then, and I would be proud again, not of her but of myself, of the fire Mara said I carried. The girl I'd raised was gone, but I wasn't. Not yet. The stars were rising outside, their light faint through the window. I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound sharp in the quiet. Dawn was hours away, but I wouldn't wait for it. I had promises to keep, not to Lila, not to Evan, but to myself, to the man I'd been before the flames tried to claim me. And as I stepped toward the door, the shadow moved with me, not behind, but within, a spark that refused to die. The guest room door clicked shut behind me, the sound swallowed by the oppressive quiet of Lila's house. My suitcase waited, a silent companion, but I wasn't ready to leave, not yet. The brass key in my pocket pressed against my thigh, its faint warmth, a reminder of the mysteries stirring around me. Mara's note tucked beside it seemed to hum with her voice. The fire is in you. I held the notebook tightly, its pages a lifeline to truths I hadn't yet uncovered. The shadow I'd sensed earlier lingered, not in the corners of the room but in the air itself, thick and expectant, as if the house knew something I didn't. I sat on the bed, the springs creaking under my weight, and opened the notebook. Its pages were a patchwork of my handwriting. Grocery lists, reminders, fragments of a life I'd thought secure. But among them were entries I didn't remember writing. Dates, amounts, cryptic notes like $2, 300 electronics unapproved, and mail redirected 3/15. My pulse quickened. These weren't just notes, they were evidence breadcrumbs I'd left for myself in moments of clarity I'd forgotten. Had I known even then that Lila was weaving a cage around me? The past year unfolded in my mind sharp and jagged like glass shards piecing themselves into a mirror I'd refused to look into. It began after my hip surgery when pain and weakness had tethered me to a cane, my body a traitor to the man who'd once carried men from burning buildings. Lila had stepped in her concern, a mask I'd mistaken for love. "Let me handle things, Dad," she'd said, her voice soft, her eyes unreadable. She took my bank cards, my passwords, my bills, promising to ease my burden. I'd been grateful, too tired to question the way she'd hover over my checkbook, her fingers moving too quickly over her phone. But gratitude blinded me to the signs. The locked study door where she and Mark spent hours, their voices low, punctuated by the clink of glasses. The packages that arrived daily, boxes of gadgets, clothes, a sleek gaming console for Evan that cost more than my monthly pension. I'd asked about them once, my voice casual, and Lila had waved me off. "It's under control," she'd said, her smile tight. "You don't need to worry." I'd believed her because she was my daughter, because I wanted to believe. Now in the dim light of the guest room, I saw it clearly. Lila hadn't been helping me. She'd been chaining me. The notebook trembled in my hands, the shadow in the room growing sharper, its edges almost tangible. I flipped to a page dated 6 months ago, my handwriting shaky but deliberate, bank statement missing. Asked Lila, said it's digital now. Below it, in smaller script, as if written in a hurry, "Check the safe, the safe." We didn't have a safe, not that I knew of. My breath caught the air in the room, suddenly heavy, electric. The shadow pulsed, and for a moment I swore I heard it, a low, crackling sound like embers stirring in a hearth. I stood my hip, protesting, and scanned the room. The guest room was sparse: a bed, a dresser, a cracked mirror reflecting my weathered face. But the notebook's words gnawed at me. "Check the safe." I moved to the closet, my cane tapping the floor, and pushed aside a pile of old coats. The back wall was bare, but as I ran my fingers along the wood, I felt it a seam too precise to be accidental. My heart thudded. I pressed harder, and a panel clicked, sliding open to reveal a small metal safe, its surface etched with the same flame-in-circle symbol as the brass key. My fingers shook as I pulled the key from my pocket. It fit perfectly, the lock turning with a soft click that echoed in the quiet. Inside was a stack of papers, bank statements, receipts, a ledger in Lila's meticulous handwriting. I scanned the pages, my blood running cold. Withdrawals I hadn't authorized: $5,000 for home improvements, $3,200 for travel expenses, $6,000 for Evan's gaming setup. My savings, painstakingly built over decades, were bleeding out, siphoned into accounts I didn't recognize. And there at the bottom was a document transferring my mail to a P.O. box I'd never seen. The shadow in the room seemed to lean closer, its presence no longer a whisper but a weight. I clutched the ledger, my anger rising like a tide, but beneath it was something else, clarity, sharp and cold. Lila hadn't just betrayed me, she'd orchestrated my erasure piece by piece until I was a ghost in her world. But why, what had turned my daughter into this stranger? This thief who'd pour coffee on me to bend me to her will. I thought of Mark, her husband, with his polished smile and eyes that never lingered. He'd always been there in the background, his voice a low hum during their late-night meetings. I'd caught glimpses of him on the phone. His tone clipped, urgent, as if negotiating something he didn't want me to hear. Once I'd overheard him say, "It's under control, he won't notice." I'd dismissed it, chalking it up to business dealings, but now it rang like a warning bell. Was Mark the architect of this, or was Lila the one pulling the strings? The safe held one more item. A small leather-bound journal, its cover worn but embossed with the same flame symbol. It wasn't mine, nor Lila's. I opened it, and Mara's handwriting stared back at me, her words a jolt to my heart. "The fire sees what you cannot. Trust it, Richard." Below, in a different ink, as if added later, "The house holds their secrets. Find them." My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the weight of her words. Mara had known something, seen something, even before her death. Had she sensed Lila's change, or was this about something deeper, something tied to the house itself? I closed the journal, my mind racing. The house creaked again, a low groan that felt like a confession. I'd always thought of it as Lila's home bought with her money, her ambition. But now I wasn't sure. The deed was in my name. I remembered suddenly a detail I'd buried under years of trust. Had Lila manipulated that too? The shadow pulsed again, and I felt it a spark deep in my chest, like the fire Mara spoke of stirring to life. I returned to the notebook, flipping to a page I hadn't noticed before. Scrawled in the margin in my own hand was a phone number and a name, Elliot Attorney. I didn't remember writing it, but the sight of it steadied me. Elliot was an old friend, a lawyer who'd handled my pension paperwork years ago. I'd trusted him then, and now it seemed I'd left myself a lifeline. The shadow in the room seemed to nod its presence, almost tangible, urging me forward. I tucked the ledger and Mara's journal into my suitcase. My movements deliberate, my resolve hardening. Lila thought she'd stripped me bare, but she hadn't seen everything. She hadn't seen the fire in me, the one Mara had sworn would never die. I thought of her pouring that coffee, her smirk, as she turned away, and I felt it a surge not of anger, but of power. The key in my pocket, the journal, the notebook. They weren't just relics. They were weapons tools to dismantle the cage she'd built. But there was more to this than money. The flame symbol, Mara's words, the shadow that moved with me, it all pointed to something larger, something hidden in the bones of this house. I remembered the locked study, the one place Lila forbade me to enter. She'd claimed it was for work, her and Mark's private space, but now I wondered. What was she hiding behind that door? What secrets did the household secrets Mara had known but never shared? I stood, my cane steady in my hand, and moved to the door. The hallway was dark. The photographs on the walls, watching me pass Lila at 6 Mara in sunlight. Moments that felt like lies now. But as I passed the study, I paused. The door was closed, a faint light seeping from beneath it. I heard voices, Lila's sharp and impatient, Mark's low and soothing. "He'll leave." Mark said, his words muffled but clear. "He has nowhere else to go." I pressed my hand against the door, the wood cool under my palm. The shadow was there too, not behind me but within a pulse that matched my own. I didn't need to open the door, not yet. The ledger, the journal, the key, they were enough for now. They were proof that Lila's control was an illusion, a house of cards waiting to fall. I returned to the guest room, my mind clear, my purpose sharp. The stars outside were bright now, their light cutting through the darkness. I wouldn't leave at dawn as Lila demanded. I'd leave on my terms when the time was right. And when I did, I'd carry the truth with me, not just the truth of her betrayal, but the truth of who I was, who I'd always been. The shadow stirred again, and I felt it, a spark, a flame growing stronger. Mara's voice echoed in my mind. "The fire sees what you cannot." I didn't understand it yet, but I would. The house, the key, the journal, they were pieces of a puzzle, and I was only beginning to see its shape. Lila thought she'd broken me, but she'd only woken me. And soon she'd learn that fire doesn't bend, it burns. The stars burned bright outside, their light slicing through the guest room's window like a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. My suitcase stood ready, the notebook, Mara's journal, and the brass key nestled inside each, a piece of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand. The ledger from the hidden safe lay heavy in my hands, its pages a map of Lila's betrayal, thousands siphoned from my accounts. My life reduced to numbers she thought she'd erased. But I wasn't erased. Not yet. The shadow that had followed me since the coffee spilled pulsed now, not just in the room but in my chest, a spark igniting into flame. I slipped Mara's pearl ring onto my finger, its warmth steadying me. Her words echoed, "The fire sees what you cannot." I didn't know what it meant, but I felt it, a pull, a certainty that the house, the key, the journal were more than they seemed. Lila thought she'd caged me, but she'd only woken something older, something stronger. I was leaving tonight not as a defeated man, but as a hunter tracking truths she couldn't bury. The hallway was dark, the photographs on the walls silent witnesses as I moved past, my cane tapping softly. The study door loomed at the end, its faint light seeping out like a secret begging to be uncovered. I paused, my hand hovering over the knob, the shadow urging me forward. But I didn't turn it. Not yet. The ledger was enough for now, a weapon sharper than any blade. I needed allies, not just evidence, and the name in my notebook, Elliot Attorney, was my first step. I stepped outside, the night air sharp against my skin, the suitcase heavy but grounding. The neighborhood was quiet, houses sleeping under the starlight, but I felt watched, as if the shadows themselves were alive. My car, an old pickup I hadn't driven in months, waited in the driveway. Lila had taken the keys, claiming I wasn't fit to drive after my surgery, but I'd kept a spare hidden in the glove box, a habit from my firefighting days. I slid inside, the engine rumbling to life, and as I pulled away, the house seemed to shrink in the rearview mirror, its windows, like eyes that couldn't follow me. Elliot's office was an hour away in a small town where the streets still remembered my name. He was a friend from my firefighting years, a man who'd handled my pension and Mara's estate with a quiet integrity that never wavered. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but the number in my notebook felt like a lifeline, a thread I'd left for myself in a moment of foresight I didn't recall. The road stretched dark before me, the stars my only guide, and the shadow rode with me, a silent passenger in the cab. When I arrived, Elliot's office was a modest building, its sign weathered but proud. The lights were off, but a faint glow came from the back, and I knocked my heart steady despite the hour. The door opened, and there he was. Elliot, older now, his hair grayer but his eyes sharp as ever. "Richard," he said, his voice warm but laced with concern. "What brings you here at midnight?" I handed him the ledger, the notebook, and Mara's journal, my hands steady. "Lila's stealing from me," I said, the words raw but firm. "She's taken my accounts, my mail, my life. I need to know what I'm up against." Elliot's face darkened as he flipped through the ledger, his fingers tracing the unauthorized withdrawals. "This is serious," he said, his voice low. "But there's more here than numbers. This house, your house, has a deed in your name, doesn't it?" I nodded, the memory surfacing like a stone breaking water. "I never signed it over. She told me it was hers, but I never saw the papers." Elliot's eyes gleamed, a spark of the old fire we'd shared in our younger days. "Then we start there. But we need more than this ledger. We need proof of intent of fraud. And we need it airtight." He led me to a back room where a woman sat at a desk, her glasses reflecting the glow of a computer screen. "This is Nora," Elliot said. "She's a forensic accountant, the best I know. If there's a trail, she'll find it." Nora was younger, her hair pulled back in a tight bun, her demeanor calm but intense. She took the ledger, her eyes scanning the pages with a precision that reminded me of Mara's focus when she balanced our checkbook. "These transactions," she said, her voice clipped, "they're sloppy. Hidden, but not well. I can trace them, accounts, dates, even IP addresses if they're digital. Give me a day." I nodded, the spark in my chest flaring brighter. "There's more," I said, pulling out Mara's journal. I opened it to her note. "The house holds their secrets. Find them." Nora's eyes narrowed, but she didn't question it. Instead, she handed me a card with her number and said, "Stay safe, Richard." Whoever did this might not take kindly to being exposed. Elliot walked me out, his hand on my shoulder. "There's something else," he said, his voice low. "I've seen cases like this before, family money control. But this feels different. That journal, the symbol on it. I've seen it somewhere, years ago, in an old case about a property dispute. It wasn't just about money. It was about power, something tied to the land itself." My pulse quickened, the brass key in my pocket suddenly heavier. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "I don't know yet, but be careful. Lila's not acting alone, and Mark, he's not what he seems. I'll dig into it. For now, get some rest. Stay at my place tonight." I declined, the fire in me burning too bright to rest. "I have one more stop," I said, my voice steady. I didn't tell him about the key, the shadow, or the pull I felt toward the house. I needed answers, and they weren't here. My next stop was the credit union, a small branch I'd used for decades. The night manager, a woman named Clara who'd known Mara, let me in despite the hour. "Richard," she said, her eyes soft with recognition. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," I said, half smiling, and handed her the notebook's account numbers. "I need to know what's left of me." Clara's fingers flew across her keyboard, her face tightening as she pulled up my accounts. "Your savings. It's been drained, Richard. Transfers to accounts I don't recognize, all within the last year. But your pension, it's still intact, deposited into a secondary account you opened years ago. Did you forget about it?" I hadn't forgotten. I'd hidden it, a precaution I'd taken after Mara's death, a nest egg I'd never told Lila about. The spark in my chest flared again, a confirmation that I'd been preparing for this, even if I hadn't known it. "Can you lock it?" I asked. "And open a new account, one they can't touch?" Clara nodded, her hands moving quickly. "Done. And I'll flag any attempts to access your old accounts. But Richard, this looks like fraud. You need to report it." "I will," I said, the ledger burning a hole in my suitcase. "But first I need the deed to my house." She printed a copy, the paper crisp and official, my name bold at the top. Richard Callahan, sole owner. Lila's lies unraveled with every line I read. The house wasn't hers. It never had been. The shadow pulsed almost tangible now, as if it approved. As I left the credit union, the brass key grew warmer, its flame symbol etched in my mind. I drove to a motel, a nondescript place where no one would look for me. The room was sparse, but it felt like freedom, a space where I could breathe without Lila's eyes on me. I spread the ledger, the journal, and the deed on the bed, piecing together the puzzle. The withdrawals, the redirected mail, the locked study, they were threads in a web, but the center was still hidden. I opened Mara's journal again, her handwriting a lifeline. A new entry caught my eye, one I hadn't seen before. "The flame is the key. It opens more than doors." My breath hitched. The words hadn't been there yesterday, I was sure of it. The shadow in the room thickened the air, crackling with energy. I held the brass key, its warmth spreading through my hand, and for a moment I saw it, a flicker of light, not from the lamp, but from the key itself, a tiny flame dancing in its grooves. I closed my eyes and Mara's voice came again, clearer. "Now, find the study, Richard. It's where they hide." My heart pounded, the spark in my chest now ablaze. The study, the locked door. Whatever Lila and Mark were hiding, it was there, and the key in my hand was the way in. I called Elliot, my voice steady despite the hour. "I need you to check something," I said. "The house, my house. There's a study Lila keeps locked. I think it's where the answers are." He didn't hesitate. "I'll pull the property records, see if there's anything unusual. And Nora's already tracing the transfers. We'll meet tomorrow, Richard. Stay sharp." I hung up the motel room, quiet but alive with possibility. The shadow was with me, not a threat, but a guide, its presence tied to the key. The journal, the fire Mara spoke of. I didn't know what I'd find in the study, but I knew it was the next step. Lila thought she'd broken me, but she'd only forged me anew. The man who'd walked into flames for strangers was waking up, and he wasn't alone. I lay back, the deed clutched in my hand, the key warm against my skin. The stars outside were fading dawn, creeping closer, but I wasn't running. I was building a case, a plan, a fire that would burn through Lila's lies. And when it did, she'd see the man she thought she'd erased standing tall in the ashes. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, a sterile contrast to the fire burning in my chest. I sat at the plaintiff's table, the brass key in my pocket. A quiet weight, its faint warmth a reminder of the path that had brought me here. Mara's journal lay in my briefcase, its pages a silent chorus of her voice. "The fire sees what you cannot." Across the room, Lila sat beside Mark, her face a mask of defiance, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Mark's polished smile was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped grimace, his hands fidgeting with a pen. The shadow that had followed me since that night in the kitchen was here too, not in the corners but in the air, a pulse that matched the rhythm of my heart. Elliot stood beside me, his suit crisp, his presence steady. Nora, the forensic accountant, sat behind us, her laptop open, a digital arsenal of evidence at her fingertips. Clara from the credit union had provided a sworn affidavit detailing the unauthorized transfers and the redirected mail. The deed to the house, my name bold across its face, lay among the documents, a cornerstone of my case. But it was the ledger, from the hidden safe, its pages marked, with Lila's meticulous handwriting, that held the sharpest edge. Every withdrawal, every lie was there, waiting to be laid bare, the judge. A woman with gray hair and eyes like steel called the room to order. Her gavel struck once, a sound that echoed like a spark igniting kindling. I felt it, the fire Mara spoke of, not just within me, but around me, as if the courtroom itself was charged with it. The shadow pulsed, and for a moment I saw it in the judge's eyes, a flicker of something ancient, something that knew the weight of truth. Elliot rose, his voice calm but commanding. "Your Honor." My client, Richard Callahan, has been the victim of systematic financial abuse and fraud orchestrated by his daughter, Lila Callahan, and her husband, Mark Reynolds. We have evidence bank statements, a ledger witness testimony that proves their intent to defraud Mr. Callahan of his savings and property. Lila's lawyer, a wiry man with a voice like gravel, stood to object, but the judge silenced him with a glance. "Proceed, Mr. Grayson," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Elliot laid out the case piece by piece, the unauthorized withdrawals, the redirected mail, the forged signatures on documents I'd never seen. Nora's findings were damning: transfers traced to offshore accounts, purchases linked to Mark's business, a pattern of deceit that stretched back years. The ledger was presented, its pages projected onto a screen. Lila's handwriting, a silent confession. I watched Lila as the evidence mounted. Her mask cracked, her hands twisting in her lap. Mark leaned toward her, whispering something, but she pulled away, her eyes darting to me, then away. I didn't hate her, not yet. But I didn't pity her either. She'd poured coffee on me, called me a burden, tried to erase me. Now the truth was burning through her lies, and I was the one holding the flame. The shadow pulsed again, and I felt it, a warmth from the brass key, stronger now, as if it were responding to the courtroom's energy. I glanced at the deed on the table, the flame encircle symbol faintly visible in the watermark, a detail I hadn't noticed before. My breath caught. Was it coincidence or something more? Mara's words echoed. The flame is the key. It opens more than doors. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the present, but the shadow seemed to linger, watching, waiting. Lila's lawyer stood, his voice dripping with confidence. Your Honor, this is a family dispute, nothing more. My clients were acting in Mr. Callahan's best interest, managing his affairs after his surgery. Any discrepancies are misunderstandings, not fraud. He produced a document claiming it was my authorization for Lila to manage my accounts. The signature was mine, or close enough to fool a casual glance, but I knew I'd never signed it. Elliot was ready. Your Honor, we have an expert in document analysis who can confirm the signature is a forgery. He called Nora, who presented a detailed report comparing the signature to mine from older documents. The differences were subtle, but clear: pressure points, ink flow, a slight tremor that wasn't mine. The judge's eyes narrowed, and Lila's lawyer faltered, his argument unraveling. I took the stand, my cane steady in my hand, my voice calm but edged with iron. I trusted my daughter, I said, looking directly at Lila. I gave her everything: my love, my home, my life. And she took it all, not because I gave it, but because she thought she could. I paused, the courtroom silent, the shadow thick around me. She thought I was weak, that I'd break, but I'm still here. Lila's eyes met mine, and for a moment I saw her, the girl who'd clung to my hand under the stars, the daughter I'd raised alone after Mara's death. But the moment passed, and the stranger returned, her gaze hardening. Mark whispered again, his hand on her arm, but she shook him off, her face pale. The judge called a recess, and Elliot pulled me aside. We're close, he said, his voice low. But there's something else. Nora found a connection, a company Mark's been funneling money to. It's tied to a property development deal, and your house is the centerpiece. That symbol, the flame and circle, it's on their letterhead. My pulse quickened, the key in my pocket burning now almost painfully. What does it mean? I asked. I don't know yet. Elliot said, his eyes serious. But it's not just about money. There's something about that house, Richard. Something they want. The shadow pulsed, and I felt it, a tug like a thread pulling me back to the house, to the locked study. Mara's journal flashed in my mind. The house holds their secrets. I nodded, my resolve hardening. Then we end this now. The trial resumed, and Nora took the stand, her voice steady as she detailed the money trail. The offshore accounts, the fake signatures, the company tied to Mark, all led back to a plan to sell my house, to turn my life's work into profit for a faceless corporation. The flame and circle symbol appeared again on a document. Nora projected its presence, a quiet shock. Lila's face crumpled, her hands covering her mouth, while Mark's jaw tightened, his eyes darting to the exit. The judge's voice cut through the tension. Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds, do you have anything to add before I rule? Lila's lawyer stammered, but Lila stood, her voice shaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said, her eyes on me, not the judge. I thought I was helping Evan, helping us. You don't understand, Dad, you never did. I didn't respond. Her words were hollow, a plea that came too late. The shadow pulsed, and I felt Mara's ring warm against my finger, a reminder of the fire I carried. The judge's gavel struck again, and her ruling was swift. Lila and Mark were liable for damages, legal fees, and restitution. The house remained mine, untouchable. The company tied to Mark would face further investigation, and a restraining order was issued barring them from contacting me. As the courtroom emptied, Lila approached her steps, hesitant. "Dad," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, I didn't." "Don't," I said, my voice low but firm. "You made your choices." The shadow was thick now, almost visible, and I felt it a strength that wasn't just mine but Mara's, the house's, something older. Lila flinched as if she felt it too and backed away, Mark pulling her toward the door. Elliot clapped a hand on my shoulder. "You did it, Richard. You're free." But I wasn't free, not yet. The key in my pocket burned the flame symbol etched in my mind. The house, the study, the secrets, they were still waiting. I thanked Elliot and Nora, my voice steady, and left the courtroom, the shadow moving with me. The stars were rising again, their light a guide, but the fire was mine now, and it was far from done burning. The courtroom's echo lingered in my bones as I drove back to the motel, the deed to my house and Mara's journal tucked securely in my briefcase. The brass key in my pocket pulsed with a warmth that felt alive, its flame-encircled symbol a quiet enigma I hadn't yet unraveled. The judge's ruling had been a victory, my savings partially restored. Lila and Mark held accountable, but it wasn't triumph I felt. It was a hollow ache, a weight that came from watching my daughter crumble under the truth. The shadow that had followed me since that scalding night in the kitchen was still with me, softer now, not urging but watching, as if waiting for what I'd do next. I settled into the motel room, the air stale but free of Lila's control. The stars outside gleamed through the thin curtains, their light a reminder of the nights I'd told her stories of constellations, her small hand in mine. That girl was gone, replaced by a stranger who'd tried to erase me. But as I opened Mara's journal, her words steadied me. The house holds their secrets. Find them. The flame symbol on the key, the same one etched in the journal and the courtroom documents, hinted at something larger, a truth tied to the house, to Lila's betrayal, to the fire Mara swore I carried. A knock at the door jolted me from my thoughts. I tensed my hand, closing around the key, its warmth a quiet reassurance. The shadow pulsed a flicker at the edge of my vision, and I opened the door to find Evan, my grandson, standing there. His face was pale, his eyes wide with a confusion that mirrored the boy I'd once known, not the sullen teenager who'd ignored me in the kitchen. "Grandpa," he said, his voice cracking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't." I stepped aside, letting him in the shadow, retreating but not gone. Evan sat on the edge of the bed, his hands twisting in his lap, his phone nowhere in sight. "Mom told me you were holding out on us." He said, his words spilling out like a confession. "She said you had money, that you didn't care about me." But then I saw the papers, the ones from court. "They lied, didn't they?" I sat across from him, the ledger and deed on the table between us. "They did," I said, my voice steady but not unkind. "Your mother and Mark took what wasn't theirs. They thought I wouldn't fight back." Evan's eyes dropped, his shoulders slumping. "I thought the gaming stuff. I thought it was okay. Mom said you approved it." He looked up, tears brimming. "Why would she do that? You're her dad." The question cut deeper than the coffee burn, deeper than the courtroom's verdict. I wanted to tell him it was greed or Mark's influence, but the shadow pulsed, and I felt it, a whisper, not Mara's voice, but something older urging me to look beyond the surface. "I don't know yet," I said, my hand brushing the key in my pocket, "but I'm going to find out." Evan nodded, wiping his eyes. "I don't want to go back there," he said. "Not with them fighting all the time. Mom's different now. She's scared." "Scared?" I asked, leaning forward, the shadow sharpening at the edge of my vision. He hesitated, then spoke in a rush. "She and Dad Mark, they've been arguing since the trial. I heard them last night in the study. Mom was yelling about some deal, something about the house. She said it wasn't worth it anymore, that it was cursed." His voice dropped to a whisper. "And there was this sound, like a crackling like fire, but there wasn't any." My pulse quickened, the key in my pocket. Burning now almost painfully, the flame symbol, the house Mara's warnings, they were converging, pulling me toward the locked study. What else did they say? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Evan shook his head. I couldn't hear much. Dad told her to shut up, said it was too late to back out, but she kept saying your name, Grandpa. Like she was afraid of you. Afraid of me. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Lila, who'd poured coffee on me, who'd called me a burden, was afraid. Not of my anger, but of something else, something tied to the house, to the fire I carried. I looked at Evan, his face open, vulnerable, and saw a chance not just for justice, but for redemption. Stay here tonight, I said, gesturing to the spare bed. We'll figure this out together. He nodded, relief washing over him, and I felt it, a spark, not just mine but his, a flicker of the boy who might still find his way. The shadow softened as if approving, and I knew Evan was part of this now, part of the truth I was chasing. The next morning I called Elliot, my voice steady as I recounted Evan's words. The study, I said. It's the key. Whatever they're hiding, it's there. Elliot was quiet for a moment, then said, I pulled the property records. There's something off about that house, Richard. It's been in your family for generations, tied to an old trust with that flame symbol. The company Mark's involved with, they've been trying to buy it for years, but the trust has restrictions. Only you can sell it. My breath caught the key in my pocket, pulsing. What's so special about it? I don't know yet, he said. But Nora's digging deeper into the company. And there's something else. The old records mention a guardian tied to the property, someone who carries the flame. It sounds like folklore, but that symbol, it's everywhere. The shadow pulsed, and I felt it, a connection not just to the house, but to something older, something Mara had known. I thanked Elliot and hung up, my mind racing. The house wasn't just a home. It was a secret one. Lila and Mark had tried to steal, one I was meant to protect. That evening I returned to the house, Evan at my side. The air was thick with tension, the stars hidden behind clouds that felt like a warning. Lila opened the door, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. Dad, she said, her voice breaking. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I thought I had to. I held up a hand, stopping her. No more excuses, I said, my voice firm but not cruel. I want the truth. What's in the study? Her eyes widened, fear flickering across her face. You don't understand, she whispered. It's not just about money, it's the house. They said it's worth millions, that there's something under it, something they need. Who's they? I asked, the key burning in my pocket, the shadow thick around us. She shook her head, tears falling. Mark's partners. They pressured us. I didn't want to hurt you, Dad, I swear. I looked at her, the stranger who'd been my daughter, and felt a pang not of forgiveness but of sorrow for what we'd lost. Show me the study, I said, my voice low, the shadow pulsing in agreement. She hesitated, then led us to the locked door, her hands trembling as she unlocked it. The room was cluttered, papers, files, a computer glowing faintly. But in the corner, hidden behind a bookshelf, was a safe, its surface etched with the flame in circle symbol. I pulled the brass key from my pocket, its warmth almost searing, and it fit perfectly, the lock clicking open with a sound like a sigh. Inside was a single document, old and brittle, written in a hand I didn't recognize. It spoke of a trust, a guardian, a power tied to the land beneath the house, a power that could only be wielded by one who carried the flame. Mara's words echoed, "The flame is the key." I looked at Lila, her face a mask of guilt and fear, and knew she'd been caught in something bigger than herself. Something she didn't fully understand. "You didn't just betray me," I said, my voice steady. "You betrayed her. Mara. She knew, didn't she?" Lila sobbed, nodding. "She told me stories when I was little. About the house, the flame. I thought they were just stories, but Mark, he believed them. He said we could sell the land, make millions. I didn't know it would hurt you." I closed the safe, the document in my hand, the shadow now a quiet presence, not urging but supporting. "You made your choices," I said. "Now you live with them." Evan stepped forward, his voice soft but firm. "I'm staying with Grandpa," he said, looking at Lila. "I don't want to be part of this anymore." Lila's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. Mark appeared in the doorway, his face hard, but he said nothing, his eyes darting to the safe. I met his gaze, the fire in me burning bright, and he looked away, defeated. I left the house with Evan the document and key in my possession, the shadow a quiet companion. Lila's apology was a start, but it wasn't enough, not yet. The truth was unfolding and I was its guardian now, not just of the house but of the fire Mara had seen in me. The stars were visible again, their light a promise of clarity, and I knew the journey wasn't over. The motel room felt different now, no longer a refuge but a waypoint, a place where the fire within me could catch its breath. The brass key lay on the table, its flame-in-circle symbol glinting under the dim lamp, no longer burning but warm, as if content with the truths I'd uncovered. Mara's journal rested beside it, its final page open to a line I hadn't seen before. The fire burns to heal, not to destroy. The words settled over me like a blanket, soft but heavy with meaning. The shadow that had followed me since that scalding night in the kitchen was quiet now, not gone but at rest, as if it knew its work was done. Evan slept on the spare bed, his breathing steady, his face free of the sullen mask he'd worn for so long. He'd chosen to stay with me, to step away from the lies Lila and Mark had woven. The document from the study, the one detailing the trust and the power tied to the house, lay in my briefcase. Its secrets no longer a threat, but a responsibility. I was the guardian, not just of the house, but of something older. Something Mara had seen and tried to pass to me. The flame symbol, the key. The whispers. They weren't just mysteries. They were my legacy. The morning sun crept through the curtains, casting a soft glow across the room. I sipped coffee from a chipped motel mug, its warmth a stark contrast to the scalding burn Lila had inflicted. The memory of that night no longer stung. It was a scar, a reminder of the fire I'd carried through betrayal. I'd won in court, reclaimed my house, my savings, my dignity. But victory wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. Something I hadn't dared hope for: reconciliation, not with the Lila who'd hurt me, but with the possibility of who she could become. A knock at the door broke the silence. I opened it to find Lila standing there, her face pale, her eyes red but clear. She was alone, no Mark, no pretense. Her hair was pulled back, her posture small, like the girl who'd once asked me about falling stars. "Dad?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, letting her in. Evan stirred but didn't wake, his presence a quiet anchor between us. Lila sat at the table, her hands clasped, avoiding the key and journal as if they might burn her. "I left Mark." She said, her words deliberate, each one a step toward something fragile. "He's gone back to his partners, his schemes. I couldn't stay with him, not after everything." I nodded, my face calm but my heart heavy. The shadow flickered a faint pulse, as if listening. "Why are you here, Lila?" I asked, my voice steady, not accusing but searching. She looked up, tears brimming but not falling. "I was wrong," she said. "I let him pull me in, let the money, the promises blind me. I thought I was building a future for Evan, for us. But I hurt you, Dad. I hurt you, and I can't undo it." Her words hung in the air, raw and unpolished. I wanted to believe her, wanted to see the girl I'd raised, but the fire in me demanded truth, not just apologies. "What was it about the house?" I asked, my hand brushing the key. "What were you and Mark chasing?" She hesitated, then spoke, her voice low. "Mark's partners. They said the land was special, that there was something under it, something valuable. They called it the Flame's Heart, said it was tied to the trust to your family. I thought it was just a story like Mom's tales, but Mark believed it. He said we could sell the land, make millions. I went along because I was lost. The Flame's Heart." The words sent a shiver through me, the key warming in my hand. Mara's journal flashed in my mind. The flame is the key. It opens more than doors. The shadow pulsed, soft but present, and I knew Lila was telling the truth, at least part of it. The house wasn't just a home. It was a guardian's charge, a secret I was meant to protect. But it wasn't about money or power. It was about legacy, about the fire Mara had seen in me. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Lila said, her voice breaking. "I just want a chance to make it right. For Evan. For you. For Mom." I looked at her, the stranger and the daughter intertwined, and felt the fire shift, not a blaze now, but an ember steady and warm. "You can't undo the past," I said, my voice soft but firm. "But you can choose what comes next. For Evan's sake, for your own. I won't shut you out, Lila, but trust is earned, not given." She nodded, tears falling now, and I saw it, a glimmer of the girl she'd been buried but not gone. The shadow softened, as if in agreement, and I knew this was the healing Mara had meant, not destruction, but renewal. Evan woke, his eyes moving between us, uncertain but hopeful. "Mom," he said, his voice small. Lila reached for his hand, her touch tentative. "I'm here," she said, her voice steadier now. "I'm going to try, Evan. I promise." He looked at me, seeking permission, and I nodded. "We're family," I said, the words heavy but true. "We figure this out together." Lila left to start anew, renting a small apartment with Evan, her steps toward redemption, fragile but real. I returned to the house, the deed in my name, the key in my pocket. The study was open now, its secrets laid bare, but the flame symbol lingered etched in the floorboards, a quiet reminder of my role. I didn't know what the flame's heart was, not fully, but I felt it, a pulse beneath the earth, a power tied to my family, to Mara, to me. I was its guardian, and that was enough. I sat in the kitchen, a fresh cup of coffee in my hands, its warmth a comfort, not a weapon. The stars outside were bright, their light filtering through the window, and I thought of Lila at 6, asking if they ever fell. They didn't, I knew now. They burned steady and eternal like the fire in me. Evan would learn that too, his own spark, kindled by the truth we'd uncovered. Lila would stumble, but she'd find her way, and I'd be there, not as a savior but as a father, holding the line between justice and love. The shadow was gone now. Or perhaps it was part of me, a quiet strength that had always been there. Mara's ring gleamed on my finger, her voice a whisper in my heart. The fire burns to heal. I sipped my coffee, the house silent but alive, its secrets safe with me. The fight was over, the wound still healing, but I was whole. The stars burned on, and so did I, an ember at rest, ready for whatever came next.